What if, for some reason, cultural or otherwise, the locals did not want to take jobs at the plant? What if they couldn't find enough qualified people in the area to get up to full staffing? When they'd made the deal, the county commissioners had promised drawing workers from nearby towns. Out here, driving an hour for supper was routine. Folks would do so for a good job, but what if they were wrong? That is an excerpt from the book The Big Empty by author Loren Steffy. In this special podcast series, we're going to focus on current economic and cultural issues faced by the state of Texas, its governments, and its citizens. We're going to explore these issues through the lens of Loren Steffy's book. The Big Empty is set in 1999 and is a tale about the sense of place and tells the story of a fictional company, AzTech, which moves or builds a semiconductor plant in the dying West Texas city of Conquistador. This attempt is beset by the clash of culture and bringing in Silicon Valley tech entrepreneurs to rural Texas. The book also raises multiple economic issues facing Texas as we move towards the mid-21st century. Over this 5-part podcast series, we will consider the following issues facing Texas today: water, power, land investment, housing, and of course, the clash of cultures. I know you'll enjoy this podcast series featuring the book's author, Loren Steffy, as we look at these issues through the lens of his book, The Big Empty. In this 5th and final episode, Loren and I take a deep dive into issues around housing in the state of Texas. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again with Loren Steffy, author of The Big Empty, for our 5th and final episode in the exploration of economic and cultural issues Loren raised in the book, The Big Empty. So, Loren, first of all, welcome back.
Thanks once again, Tom. Great to be here.
Loren, last issue I wanted to raise with you is the issue of housing. And when you have a massive new infrastructure project, bringing a plant or a Bitcoin mining operation or a something, where you're going to have new people come into the community, housing is going to be an issue. Housing is becoming a hugely important issue across the state of Texas. I think many politicians are recognizing now that affordable housing could actually be a negative impact on the state of Texas. I think we're number 30 in the country for affordable housing, for attracting new businesses. So I wanted to maybe use this last episode to explore that issue of housing. The housing that you brought up in the book was equally interesting because it was a gated community in a rural West Texas town, which is probably their first gated community. I really wanted to start with the gated community, and certainly the gated nature of the community sets it apart. Did that the simple fact that it was gated, did that engender resentment within the town? And then maybe how do you see, when you put in a multi-million-dollar development, what's that start to do to housing prices and those attendant questions?
Yeah, the whole idea of the gated community was something that I was trying to show. One of the themes of the book is as the people move, largely in this case from California, they're not trying to understand the land. They're not trying to understand what it means to live in the town. They don't have a sense of being a part of the community. And the gated community just does that, right? You're literally building a gate to cut yourself off from everybody else. And if my wife were here, she would roll her eyes because I have a whole rant I do about gated communities. And I've lived in neighborhoods where there's been discussion about, should we gate the community? Oh, we had a car burglary. We should build a gate on the community. I'm like, I didn't move here to put myself in prison. Like, I'm sorry. I don't, like, the whole concept to me is not really what a community should be about. Everybody building their own little walled off areas. And so that was a big part of the theme that I wanted to get to in the book. But the other thing that you see happening in the Big Empty with regards to housing, there's a much bigger theme there, which is you have this grand Texas ranch, the Conquistador Ranch, which is one of the largest, it had been one of the largest ranches in the state's history. And little by little, it's getting sold off. And, you know, who's buying it? It's not other ranchers in most cases. And that's a theme that we have seen play out across Texas for decades. I actually just got done doing a piece. Texas Monthly is having its 50th anniversary next year, and I did a piece in their 50th anniversary issue about this very thing, talking with a ranch broker about what he's seeing in terms of the buying trend. And recreational ranching has become a much bigger thing. And earlier, in an earlier episode, we talked about the resort effect, and that applies to ranching too. As these ranches get chopped up, sold off to people that are buying them not for economic productivity or something like that, but just for leisure, these land values go up, and it's harder and harder to afford land. If you're a young person starting out and you didn't inherit land and you want to start a farm or a ranch, it's a lot more expensive to do it than it used to be, obviously.
One of the issues in Kerrville is affordable housing. And even the term, quote, affordable, end quote, housing is now a divisive term because it has certain connotations to certain groups. But in Kerrville, for instance, and I think in other similar sized communities across the state of Texas, a school teacher cannot afford to buy a house in Kerrville. A firefighter cannot afford to buy a house. A policeman cannot afford to buy a house. A city employee cannot afford to buy a house. And when the city leaders talk about trying to bring in businesses and industry to Kerrville, that's one of the first questions is where can our workers be housed? And it sometimes answers, there's towns 20 miles away. It's not a bad commute. And that's really not the right answer. But how do we begin to think about that type of housing crisis where a town such as Kerrville really doesn't have anything less than a $400,000 home inside and there's a solid 30% of the community every time who will vote against every measure to change that, but simply they don't want change. So how do we start to think through those issues literally across the state? Because I know in Wimberley, that's also an issue.
Yeah, and a lot of other communities as well. It's a huge challenge, and you're right. It's not a popular thing with most voters. It's not just that they don't want change. The idea that you're going to do anything to in any way subsidize housing, to give people some sort of a handout or something, it's not a popular idea, especially in rural parts of the state where people have carved out a hardscrabble existence for generations and nobody helped me. Why? And it's hard to understand how significantly these issues have changed. I think that companies themselves need to be doing more when they look at locating in a community. It's not just about plopping down a plant and seeing how many tax breaks you can get. It's about, are you going to be a part of that community? Are you going to support the community? Do you want your people living in the community in which, you have built this plant and made some sort of an investment? And I think companies need to, and we're starting to see this trend at what they call the C-suite level. There is a lot more discussion about communities and what is a business's responsibility to their communities. I think those are really good and important discussions to have, and I hope that they move beyond just the feel-good corporate speak kind of things and actually see action. I think companies have to think about that, right? You don't want to build a plant so that your employees can live 20 miles away in a different town, right? And by the way, that's not why the town, whether it's Kerrville or wherever, wants your company there. As we talked about in the earlier episode, part of the rationale behind these tax breaks is you're going to come in, your people are going to live in the community because that's where the additional tax revenue is going to come to support the tax breaks that you've been given. If they're living 20 miles away, that money's going somewhere else. So or at least some of the money's going somewhere else. So I think companies themselves have to take a more active role in this and really think it through and think about how do we get our people to live in these communities, and if they're unaffordable, what can we do to help out? I'm not saying we should go back to the days of the company housing, a company store and script and all that kind of stuff, but I think that there are things that companies can do to help communities with this effort.
And I don't want to suggest this is a small town or rural Texas problem, because the city of Houston has the same problem in terms of affordability to live in the city of its workers. In an earlier episode, you mentioned Aspen, but you brought up the example of it doesn't matter how much money I have. If I go to a restaurant, I want somebody there to serve me food or mix me a drink. And the waiters and bartenders can't afford to live in the city of Houston. Now, Houston, for better or worse, has basically unlimited land and unlimited ability to expand. So you can get a house probably within 100 miles of Houston. But it's the same situation as San Francisco or Seattle. there's no housing in those towns, and you have to live a 2-hour commute away. And so your lifestyle is significantly reduced. So how do you see those issues in a major metropolitan area, someplace as large as the city of Houston?
Yeah, the old saying in Houston is Houston's an hour away from Houston. It's really true. The big issue there is it's not that you can't find affordable housing. It's just you can't find it in a reasonable proximity to where you need to work in a lot of cases. I actually hope that the response to COVID, the fact that a lot of companies have embraced remote work and many are going to continue using a remote working model in some form, I'm hoping that will help with some of this. Because I think, first of all, I think it will be good for smaller communities because people they like the more laid back lifestyle of smaller towns. The big problem is you got to have a job. I've been saying for years, if I were the mayor of a small town in West Texas, like Conquistador, I did not have a mayor character in the book, and so this did not happen, but I would scrape together whatever tax dollars or money I could find from whatever source and build high-speed internet, because that's a big factor. If you move from a city to a rural area and you're trying to work from home, you've got to have good internet. And I think that it will be interesting to see how the remote work mindset plays out, but it seems like it's here to stay, and it may help address some of these housing issues. On the other hand, if you look at housing trends, the average cost of new homes, for example, has gone up. And part of the reason for that is people want bigger homes because they have to have home offices. It's a double-edged sword, but I do think we're seeing a shift in a lot of these issues and a lot of these characteristics, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
So I'd like to turn to an issue you talked about a little bit earlier in this podcast, Loren, which is the selling off as ranches, and then go back to one of the key themes we started this podcast series with, which is the sense of place. As these ranches are being sold off, obviously we're losing a part of Texas, but is because some people may see land just as an asset, and it's an asset to be exploited, to be used appropriately by the owner. Others see land as our life or our heritage. And so I wanted to maybe end with exploring on these selling off as ranches. I think we have to acknowledge that change is inevitable, but is there a way for us to retain our heritage as Texans, whatever that may be to you personally, and still use assets that make this state so great to continue that growth into the 21st century?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. It is very much at the center of our state's DNA. The idea of the Grand Texas Ranch is pretty much what most people think of when they think of Texas. And so as these places go away, it's difficult. They get sold into smaller pieces. And in many cases, it's not that we're losing the land, right? And a lot of the recreational ranchers that are buying up these properties want to preserve them. And in some cases, even make them better. Ranching is not great for the environment. And if somebody wants to buy 1,000 acres and turn it back to its natural state, that can be a good thing. But there is some part of the Texas myth that's getting lost in that. And it's not, I don't want to say that it's all negative. I think it's an evolution that's occurring. The economics of ranching are not good, and they haven't been good for a long time, and they're getting worse, and it's an ongoing challenge. But if you look at, for example, the 4 Sixes ranch was sold to Tyler Sheridan, the guy behind Yellowstone. And he's got an investment group, but he's the lead investor. And part of that is they want to keep the ranching operations going. They're doing some branding, right? You can buy 4 Sixes merch, or you will be able to soon. But then he's also going to use part of the property to set up a film studio, which could be a great idea, right? I don't know about you, but I get really annoyed at seeing a lot of movies about Texas that are clearly not filmed in Texas. So to the extent that we could fix that, I'd be in favor of that. And so I think it's important to not portray what's happening as a bunch of people who don't care. It's not Blaine Witherspoon's coming in, buying up the Conquistador Ranch and turning it into water park or something. That's not really what's happening. I think that in a lot of cases, the new buyers do want to preserve the land and do appreciate it for what it is. But at the same time, if ranches are becoming smaller pieces and whatnot, we are losing something. There's a part of our state identity that I guess is going away. And that's
So that seems, I don't want to say a melancholy way for us to end, but I think really a great way for us to end this series. I wanted to thank you again for not only writing the book, it was a great read, but exploring these, I think, important issues. And before we leave, If anyone wanted to buy a copy of the book or perhaps find out more about you and your overall work, where would be the best place for them
So you can go to stonycreekpublishing.com, and there's information there about my book and other books that we're publishing. You can also find it on a little service called Amazon, as well as in your favorite bookstore or online retailer.
Loren, I wanted to thank you again. I look forward to continuing our conversations.
Thanks a lot, Tom. I've really enjoyed it.
This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this 5-part series featuring Loren Steffy, author of The Big Empty, as we've looked at 5 current economic issues facing the state of Texas through the prism of Loren's book. If you'd like more information, I would urge you to check out The Big Empty. You can buy it on Amazon.com. This is Tom Fox. Thanks so much for listening again. I hope you will enjoy our next special series.